that we are not going to get through all of it. Welcome to the last and best class for the day. There'll be a better one tomorrow that somebody that I know will be presenting as well. We're going to start off with the title of this presentation is How to Save the World in 5 Minutes, and it's going to take us 15 minutes to figure out how to do it in 5 minutes. So we're going to start with a little video here. Come on. Come on. Okay. It's not showing. Let's see here. We're just going to move right along here. Where are we? The audio's not cooperating, but we'll go through kind of what they said here in the video. Normally I have a helper. But, lizard with a ladder, that's what we need. Lizard with a ladder. Let's see, will it do it this way? Oh, okay. Let's do it. Let's figure this out. Pause it? Yeah. Heck, we'll restart it. Okay, while he's figuring out how to save me, not the world, I'm going to have spoons going around. So take a spoon, and then at different intervals of the class, we're going to have 3 different honeys to taste. One will be an international honey, one will be a regional U.S. honey, and one will be the best honey in the world, which is what we produce. And we'll figure out which one is which at the end. To kind of get started, one of the things that this video was going to show, let's see, maybe he'll get it. Well, let's go ahead and get started. How many of you have bees already? A couple of troublemakers, all right. Some of you that I work with or have worked with. How many of you are? There we go. Perfect. Our Savior. Round of applause. Thank you. Let's get this show started. Thank you. Okay, here we go.
Bees are so fascinating. When you first go into a beehive, you're like worried about getting stung. And then as soon as you start watching them and seeing them on the combs communicating with each other, it's just so fascinating, so complex. And it mostly works until we get in the way of it.
Populations of honeybees are dying at levels that are unprecedented and very concerning. Close to half of the colonies in the U.S. dying every single year.
Need pollinators in this sphere. Farming has become a lot bigger, and so due to all this, now they need beekeepers that can move bees from one place to the other.
We can learn a good deal from bees about the health of the landscapes that we inhabit, and we can learn a good deal about the folly of setting up our agriculture in quite the way that we have.
Agriculture is an interruption of a natural system, but it can be done thoughtfully as an interruption of a natural system with great benefits.
It's going to take 20, 30 years for that ground to get back in shape it was to sustain life for all these wild insects, birds, and fowl and everything else.
Protecting the land around us, protecting the soil under us is really our obligation. And from that, we get delicious, nourishing products.
We've been pollinating fruits and vegetables and nuts since the 70s, 60s, 50s. And we haven't had these kind of losses. We're not paying beekeepers, we're just trying to hang on to our business.
You could interchange every time they said bees there with crops. basically what they said. They said beehives mostly work until we get in the way of things. Same thing with farming, right, or ranching. Populations of honeybees are dying at unprecedented levels, almost half of them. Sometimes, we have this same talk with crops, where our crops are failing for some reason. Our seeds are maybe not as good as they were before. Same thing with, you could say this with cattle. We can learn a great deal from bees about the health of our landscapes we inhabit. We're learning about that as it pertains to soil and plant health and things like that. So same thing with the bees. We can learn a good deal about the folly of setting up our agriculture in the way we have. This is what, no-till has been doing to kind of combat the way we have things set up. Same thing happens with bees. Agriculture is an interruption of a natural system, but we can be done thoughtfully as an interruption of a natural system with great benefits. So bees are something that we can take and add to the interruptions that we have in a natural system by our cover crops, and we can add them to kind of get back to nature a little bit. And protecting the land around us, protecting the soil under us is really our obligation, and from that we get delicious, nourishing products. I mean, that's why we're here, right? This is the first no-tiller, lived about 160 years ago. I mean, that quote says it all, right? Land is not merely soil. It is a fountain of energy flowing through a circuit of soils, plants, and animals. A circuit of soils, we talked about, minimizing tillage to make sure the soil has the connections of energy and other things that we're learning about. The plants, we're talking about having living roots, having diversity in cropping systems. And animals, talk about integrating livestock. In our earlier session we talked about bees as a flying livestock. It's kind of like your last row of, to fulfilling your full regenerative system. So we know who this guy was, and he knew what we're learning here now 150, 180 years ago. So this is not something new. This is something we're still trying to perfect, trying to get back to. So this is why I'm so passionate about what I do. We are North American Pollinator Alliance, Napa Bees. We work with farmers throughout the state of Kansas. We've tried to delve down into Oklahoma, up into Nebraska a little bit. We've had more successes than failures. We run feral honeybee colonies alongside cropping operations. We do also work with some homesteading families. We do field days out at different farms. We had a couple this year that were, very successful as part of just one little snippet of, of a broader field to see how we can integrate honeybee operation into our operations. How does making the world's most delicious honey help save the world? This is a picture of some of the honeys that we have. We can talk more about crystallization of honey and things like that. These are little 3-ounce bottles of honey. Some of these bottles are 7 and 8 years old. Honey does crystallize. We can talk about that more at the booth or tomorrow. But I want you to see that there's differences in the product that you can produce naturally, a product that's alive. This crystallization is happening in honeys because it's alive, because it's free of treatments, of chemicals, of plastics, basically how we keep bees. We're not going to talk about the beekeeping industry in this class. We're going to be talking about how we can actually feed our families, our communities, and why bees are so important to have on our homestead, how we can integrate them intimately into our lives and entwine them in everything that we do. Desertification. Well, that used to be a problem around these parts. In my other class, we talked about, we have a picture that I should have probably included here. The Dust Bowl took a big toll on this area in the 30s. But in my other class, I showed a picture of a farmer in Deerfield, Kansas, that in September 11th of 1936, the height of the Dust Bowl here in Kansas, he was turning in 17,000 pounds of alfalfa seed for sale. You know, a millionaire in those times where everybody else was having to deal with this, and that family did not have any beehives of their own. They were relying on the bees that were here naturally. His great-grandson works for the NRCS in Nebraska, and he vouches that they didn't have any beehives, that all the pollination and all that seed was produced from native pollinators and honeybees that were in the area because they're just so vast and expanse in numbers here in Kansas. But that's the thing of the past, right? You know, how did they solve this back then? You know, I love this picture, you know. If only we had something that slowed flood waters, you know, prevented soil erosion, absorbed carbon dioxide, produced oxygen, and provided habitat and nourishment to wild animals, and made the world a beautiful place. We're in the prairie states, you know. I do promote a lot of shrubs and trees as part of our systems. And I understand that that is a touchy subject in the prairie states. Now, just because we found this place as a prairie, you know, when it was here, does it really need to stay that way? Do we really want to live in the conditions that they lived, you know, 200, 300, 400 years ago? Or can we turn our little areas, you know, into more productive lands if we have, you know, if we were able to grow food forests, for instance? You know, this might be the answer. Living roots is the answer that we're finding to make our places more regenerative, productive. The Great Plains Shelter Belt was a project to create windbreaks that began in 1934. So the U.S. government, the federal government, decided that we needed to put people to work because of the Great Depression, and we needed to combat this desertification that we had caused when we started, you know, using, you know, the tractors after World War I and started tilling and tilling and tilling. Their solution to this was to throw as many of these food forest plots. Luckily, in our area, you can see they went all the way from North Dakota all the way to just the north of Texas. And guess where we are? And guess why I am here based in Kansas? We are seeing the end of, you know, this reign of these amazing food forests that were planted. We're talking about ladder foods for wildlife, for bees, for protection from wind, from soil erosion, from floodwaters. You know, the tree rows that you have now contain many of these things, but they're dying off. I mean, they're at their almost 100-year mark. They're 90 years old, and we're not replenishing what we learned was going to fix our land, you know, for centuries. So the thought really for this class is, can we do something like this? Or should we do it? Or do we even need to do it? I mean, the Dust Bowl was 90 years ago. That doesn't affect us. Many of you have places on your properties that look like this in the spring and summer. And many of you see these places, these tree rows, these overgrown, outdated, old tree rows that get in your way that are like eyesores. I see something like this and I see honey. I see a product. Can I do something with this? Now, there are tree rows that are not productive for honey, but we'll talk about what is in here. It's really easy to lose sight of, you know, there's so many things going on here. And in my previous class, I said to be successful with honeybees, you need to have color in your landscape. There's only one color here now, but I know that all these plants that are in here will produce blooms of color. When I say we need color to produce honey, I'm talking about blooms that are color other than green. We need blooms that are white, that are blue, that are yellow, that are orange, pinks. Those are the things that when we see on our farm, we need to think, okay, I have food for bees. Or when we go to plant things on our land, we want to see those colors in our landscapes to ensure that our livestock will have enough food. So at times in early spring, it'll look like this, green, like a green background that's, that doesn't look good. Our solution, unfortunately, to many of these things, when we have enough time and when we've saved enough money, or when we've earned enough brownie points for our neighbor who has a bulldozer to come help us out, is this. This is usually the solution to an overgrown area when, we can get to it. I've partaken in things like this where we've cleared, sections of land all winter, taking out everything we possibly could to make it into productive land. But we didn't see what was in there. We didn't see the asset that we had there already. In here, we've gotten now rid of wildlife. We've gotten rid of habitat for honeybees and pollinators that are already helping the bees or your fields surrounding them. We are now taking away habitat from all the earthworms that live under there that will crawl out. That's where all of our kind of matriarch insects live. And we've taken it away. Many shelter belts in Kansas throughout the great state of the Great Plains are old and no longer providing the benefits that they used to. And it shows. 2 years ago. These are pictures from 2021. You guys, many of you experienced this dust bowl, this mini dust bowl that happened 2 years ago. So those pictures that were in black and white look exactly like this. So the solution to this, we already know what it is. We need to be able to, to stop this, to turn the tide on this, and this is a great time to do it. How many of you guys experienced that? Yeah. So it's something that really kind of opened your eyes that where did this thing come from? In my town of Hutchinson, just north, this accumulation of sand, if these were black and white pictures, it would look as if it was 90 years ago. This is almost 6 feet of sand that's being caught by windrows. This is the entrance to our beautiful city of Hutchinson. At a time, you couldn't even see the fire hydrant. So we need to figure out how to get back away from this and to turn our land into a productive, something that's productive for us. Many of our tree rows, I do get called out when tree trimmers take out big trees that are snags, and they might not be able to take out the whole row, but they take out, they have to pay the foresters or the tree services to come out, take out the big trees so they don't block driveways or fall into fields. I get called out a lot to go save the bees from these trees that are in there. So the practical use of these trees as far as food for bees and homes for bees, we've exhausted that. We're to the 80, 90-year mark on some of these trees that are no longer useful for what they were intended for. We're going to start passing around the first honey and put some on your spoon and have it. How many of you guys know where there's a beehive on your property? How many of you guys don't know where the bees are, but they show up to your dog's water bowl? Yeah. Or your pool, right? Or, when you're filling your sprayer, you see them all around your hydrant. So we know there's bees somewhere, and we don't need to know exactly where they are to be able to harness them and their energies and their efforts. So, how to save the world on a personal level. We're not going to talk about commercial beekeeping, but we're going to talk about my backyard. This was my backyard before I came to no-till on the plains in 2020. And after the conference that I came to, it changed my world. This was my backyard. It's still my backyard. It just looks a little different. But this is how we save the world, one backyard at a time. Many of you I know are thinking about how do I solve world hunger? You know, how do I feed my communities? How many of you could feed yourselves with all the acreage that you have? If you had to eat just what you produced, how many of you could do it? Is it going to be a lot of work? Yes. Are you going to have to change some things? Are you going to have to prioritize your nutritional needs over the needs of what the co-op wants? Yeah. This is a tough decision. When you have to decide, you know, to change what you're doing to be able to feed yourself, this is a tough decision. When I went back home after attending the No Till on the Plains conference, I looked at my backyard and I saw a desert. I mean, this is a desert. This is no different than, you know, what happened in the Dust Bowl. I could not survive off of this 1/8 of an acre. But we can turn the tide. We've done it once. You know, can we as farmers do a little less of this and a little more of this? Do we like using all this petrol for doing this instead of doing a little bit more of this? I mean, can we really just think about changing some of our landscape into something that's going to be more productive for ourselves? Until we personalize, you know, until we make it intimate what we're eating, we can never turn the tide on this desertification that we might be a part of causing. So a lot of you might see your backyards, your tree rows as this, whereas I saw this. But there's more in here than meets the eye, just like more in here that meets the eye. I think that's my next question. For you to kind of see the transformation that I've gone through in the last 6 years, we'll have a side-by-side picture here. This is my same backyard. My food forest now, you know, live in 5-gallon containers. I plant bare root trees along with shrubs, and then the cover crop that you see in here to help out. So I'm able to, in my backyard, create these mini food forests. And these trees and shrubs eventually end up on farmers' tree rows. So instead of just planting cedar trees, we end up planting all these are blooming plants and shrubs and trees. I used to do just pots of trees and just pots of shrubs. But then 4 years ago, we had a really hot summer, and I kept having to water more of the trees, more of the pots. That particular spring, I overbought bare root trees and shrubs, and I overgrafted many of the things that winter. So I actually had to shove some of these pots were a shrub and a tree, and some were just trees and some were just shrubs. And the best pots that ended up coming out of that heat were the ones that had the shrub and the tree in them. The trees would be able to suck water, you know, that was 1 or 2 days old, and bring it up to help feed the shrub. And then the shrub would provide shade around the base of the tree to be able to keep everything up there moist. So they actually work together. And that's how I kind of learned that. And then looking at landscapes, like we were looking at, that's essentially what's happening here. All the shrubs are protecting the trees, and the trees are able to pull up water to help feed some of the shrubs. So there's something going on here beyond what we understand. I've since, because of the No Till on the Plains conference, I figured out, well, how can I do cover cropping in this system? Well, I plant my cover crops for early spring inside these pots when the trees are naked and the shrubs are desiccated or naked. So as the cover crop comes up and goes to seed, it provides, you know, a mini climate for the shrub and the tree. When it goes to seed, the bees will pollinate the seed. I steal the pod, and the rest of the plants, the rest of the cover crop gets chopped down and fed to rabbits to make rabbit poop for the next set of pots for the fall. A little video. just to wake you guys up a little bit. When this is all the operations that I have in my backyard. I raise chicken, quail, only a couple turkeys. I do have a couple pigs now. In the city limits on 1/8 of an acre. Last year I produced just under 1,800 pounds of meat on a vertical system. So everything rotates through itself on that little plot of land that you saw. I'm able to feed myself like 98% off of just everything that I create. I do buy bananas and I do buy citrus, which I can't have yet. But I did just buy lemon trees this last fall, so I don't have to buy lemons anymore. But it is possible for you to change the world one backyard at a time. What would drive someone to want to plant something to feed themselves? Well, the pandemic helped a lot. The pandemic has shifted the thought process of, we have, farmers that might have not had gardens have decided to start gardening on their farms. People, same thing, shortages. How many of you guys experienced shortages during the pandemic? Yeah, at some point, there was a shortage of something that you needed, that you knew that you could probably produce if you had had the resources in place, right? The egg story here, when I went to Walmart, this was about April, the height of the pandemic, to go buy my 5 dozen eggs for the month to eat, before, when I had nothing in my backyard. I went to the counter to check out, and the sales associate, the person at the register, just very briefly just asked, well, how many people are in your household? And I said, well, it's just me. And then she just politely said, I'm sorry, you can't purchase this. If there's only one person in your household, you can get a 6-pack or a 12-pack. We're not allowed to sell you a 5 dozen count of eggs. And I was floored. How could you not take my money? I'm not hoarding eggs. This is what I do every month. I buy 5 dozen eggs. I was just floored. And I wanted to cause a ruckus, but everything was always, everything was very touchy, and I didn't want to be kicked out of the store because I wanted to come back. And I thought, well, I'll buy a dozen eggs, and I'll come back in 2 hours and buy another dozen eggs, and I'll come back in 2 hours when she's off and buy another dozen eggs. I was trying to figure out how I could continue my existence. Just somebody to tell me, no, you cannot have this food, that didn't sit right with me. As soon as I left Walmart, I went to Orscheln's, and no one would help me with the chicks. I said, fine, don't sell me eggs, I'll make my own eggs. I'll go buy chicks. It's April, I know they've got chicks. Nobody was around. I grabbed a box. I stuffed it full of 24 chicks. I didn't wait for the associate. I'm like, this is not happening. I'm taking chicks home one way or another. I go to the counter, and the lady's like, sorry, we have a limit of 6 chicks per person. I'm like, what? So in an hour's period, I was told twice by 2 different entities, you shall not feed yourself. You cannot. You can't afford to feed yourself. And on top of that, I said, fine, I'll take those 6. And they said, well, I need you to write your name, your phone number, your address, where these chickens are going to be. And I said, okay, this is wrong. So on so many levels, I was so mad. So then I went to Tractor Supply, same thing, but I got 6 there. And the next day I went back to Orscheln's when I knew that gal didn't work, and I got 6 more. So I got my 24 chicks that year. But I said, this will never happen to me again. I will going to figure out how to feed myself on the place that I live. More people began gardens because they had more time at home. Many people got laid off, or many people, were paid to work from home. Not farmers, right? They began working for themselves, for the communities. This is the change, the amazing change and transformation that the pandemic allowed us. It allowed us to be able to work for ourselves. It's kind of funny in Kansas, you have to pay tax on food. In California, you don't. You have to pay taxes other way, but it's really tough when you when you work for somebody, you get taxed, for your wages, but then you go to the store and you get taxed for food when I could grow it tax-free at my house. Heck, my co-op will sell me chicken meal without charging me tax for it. A lot of people, though, when they started farming for themselves, they realized they had poor soils, like on their home. Sometimes farmers, which have been working for 30 years on their farms to better their soils, they realized that the soil in their backyard was bad, was not life-sustaining. This conference is amazing because it makes you look at the bigger picture, but we need to start looking at our backyard. Are we incorporating everything we're learning in our own backyard? Can we make this intimate? And if they did get plants to bloom, they found they had no pollinators. This is where I came in. They realized, how many of you started growing potato or tomato plants, and how many of you actually did this or have done this to where you have had to human pollinate a tomato plant because you could not attract enough pollinators? So this is obviously not the way things were designed, but we do what we can. So this is the part where we can save the world in 5 minutes. We have to be able to transform our backyard or any of our idle land that we have on our places or our less productive land into stuff that is productive. Is it going to cost a lot in infrastructure? Probably. Are we going to have the time to do it? But this is the only way. If we can't feed ourselves in the immediate community, we're going to have a really hard time making an impact on a global scale. We used to do this. We used to not have to go to grocery stores, to get this or to get that, to make our own butter, to make our own mayonnaise. But we have prioritized other things instead of creating food for ourselves. Food forest or weed patch? How many of you see this as a weed patch? Okay, I'm telling you it's a food forest. So, how many people can identify some of the bee food sources in here? Any hands? What do you got? Sumac, okay, so pronghorn sumac right here. Okay, very good. What else? Poison ivy, yes. I've actually made poison oak honey one time, and it was incredible, ruby red in color. What else? Blackberry, very good. Got blackberry bush right here. What else? There's 7, so there's 4 more out there. No elderberry. We got a grape. You guys see this? Wild grapes. You guys probably have wild grapes in your places. Now, the wild white grapes, do you guys know Kansas in the 1950s produced more table grapes than any other state in the Union? Yeah. So all these wild varieties of grapes that you have, how about we trellis them? How about we not clear them out and figure out how to make them productive for us again? They've been around for 60 years, 80 years. What else do you guys see? Okay, let's cheat. Willow. So you got your trees, dogwood. Sometimes this one actually was a tree, but most of the time they're shrubs. When they get really old, they can get really big. So you got dogwood, sumac, poison ivy, blackberry, sandhill plum. It's right there. You can kind of see it. Wild grapes. So before we go tearing out these areas, have me out. Let's have a look at what you got. Or just send me pictures. Or let's figure out what you have to make sure we don't tear that stuff out if we're thinking about incorporating honeybees. Does that make sense? You can take a calendar. We're at a great time of the year where you can go buy yourself a little 50-cent calendar at Walmart, and every time you see a bloom, you could take a picture of it, you could send it to me, or you could write down what day you saw that bloom. And then next year, you can look for it again. You'll be able to see it. One of the biggest complaints I have from some of the people that I work with is they go, Jorge, you've got me going crazy. Like every time I see a bloom, I have to pull over, I have to go dig in through that ditch just to get you this picture. They're like, you got me, like, people are like waving around me and people are mad at me. They're like, they don't know what's going on. They think I'm having a heart attack or something, and they stop and talk to me, and I'm just telling them I'm trying to identify this weed. And they look at me like I'm crazy. When you incorporate honeybees into your operation, you will want to know what food is out there that's feeding your bees for free, right? So this is very important. You know, our lenses really change when we have a different livestock. The second part of how to save the world, get yourself a beehive and learn how to manage it without inputs. Our bees are able to see, I'm going to sound crazy here, but our bees are a good, like they said in the video, they're a good predictor of the health of our environment. They can also give us good insight as far as when blooms are going to happen in the tree rows, which we can use to know if we might be getting moisture or not. So as far as I can see, the bees know the weather 8 months ahead because they can read the trees and the tree rows. I can only see about 6 weeks out because I can look at the reproductive cycle of a natural feral honeybee colony on your place to see if the bees are going to be building up because there's going to be a nectar flow, so blooms, meaning water, or not. And I'm refining that Jorge almanac for Kansas. The third thing that you can do to save the world is you need to involve your successors. You know, the most rewarding part of what I do, I have tried changing beekeepers. I have tried really hard to change beekeeping associations and trying to get them to be more, not natural, but to be input free. And it's hard. But I've realized that if I can influence enough young people to see a natural system, that these hundreds of children that are seeing a natural system work on its own and be regenerative, they're the ones that will stand up one day and go, nope, that's not how you keep bees. When I was a kid, my dad forced me into a bee suit and he made me sit there and see how these work. This is what's important. Having your other generations here. This is how we're going to save the world. We have to be able to introduce the future generations into a natural reproductive system. You and I cannot do it. They will do it. They will stand up one day and say enough is enough. I love old books. I mean, we have old books. This is a Kansas apiary protected by a natural windbreak. It didn't have a date, but we've had bees the European honeybee has been in the U.S. for 400 years this year. I mean, they're native enough. I have been quoted saying that we run native bees, and I'm going to get in big trouble when that article comes out next year. But I call these European honeybees native bees. I mean, how many years do they have to be here surviving on their own for them to be native? More nectar goes to waste than is gathered. 50 to 80% of it is lost simply because there are no bees to gather it. There are no managed bees. This was written 150 years ago. E.R. Root was huge in commercial beekeeping. But this is, he missed the point, I think, which says, because there are no bees in beehives to gather it. There's bees out there. We have to be patient at some places, waiting for the bees to come to our boxes. But there are bees here. And we just need to figure out how to provide a home where they want to stay. Keeping the soil covered as much as possible. Keeping a living root. We can make 7 different types of honeys here in Kansas. Sorry, 11 types, 7 coming from crops. Corn does not make honey, but it produces a huge abundance of pollen. So very important crop for bee nutrition. We got alfalfa, you got soybeans, you got cotton, and there's several others. There once was a community whose farms weren't thriving. All the villagers decided they would come together and pray for rain. On the day of the prayer, all the village gathered, but only one man came with an umbrella. I'm here today with that umbrella. It is not good enough to wait for change. We have to be so convinced that change will happen for us to take action. Until I was told no 2 times in one day that I did not have enough money to feed myself, that's when it became personal. That's when I had to figure out how to incorporate rabbits, quails, chickens, turkeys, and now pigs this year. And yeah, I might get kicked out of my place in town because I have pigs, but you know what? I'll have a freezer full of food. The honeys. I have a couple more slides after the presentation. I guess that's my 5 minutes to talk, so I kind of made it on time. But we're going to end the talk there, because I know you guys might have some questions, and it's the end of the day. So that was the whole presentation. Are there any questions? Yes?
How do you deal with HOAs?
You move out. You're not a tree. You have legs, not roots.
What about those who don't have access to land? Like, how do you navigate talking with those HOA boards?
It's like trying to convince that Walmart associate to sell me more eggs. You have chosen to live there. You know, how important is, your self-sufficiency to where you live? I mean, that's the bottom question. It's like, how are you going to get to a point where your HOA is going to tell you how to live? Is it worth living there anymore? That's a tough answer for you, but you can't. We're not trees. We have legs. We're blessed in that way. Yes? Yes. Yes, so the cover crop goes in the fall, just gets sprinkled on top and just covered over. So the first thing that comes up are those early cover crops that I put. Every year is different. I've used borage, canola. This year I did yellow sweet clover. Borage is probably my favorite one. But those will be the first ones that come up, all your annuals. Or I plant species that will come up early in the spring. As those come up and go to bloom, I'll steal all that seed to plant for another year, and then I'll hack all of the roughage, all the rest of the plant to feed to my rabbits. And then by the time the winter cover crop is done, my shrubs are starting to wake up, and the buds from my trees are starting to open up. So I'm able to actually do something enough with the soil. I'm able to create these microclimates with all 3 things working together. Yeah?
How did you cover the area? Is that a piece of plastic over the top of that?
It's mesh, so it's like 1/8 by 1/8 inch plastic mesh. Okay. Yeah.
So you got a little microclimate inside the...
Yeah, and for I do have to protect them sometimes from freezing weather, and RV covers are actually the most economic way to do that, because they're made actually of hardier material than the winterizing material, which is a little bit more expensive, and you get it in a huge chunk. So I have had to use those. I don't have a greenhouse yet, because the moment I have a greenhouse, the city will come by again and realize I have all these roosters and 67 chickens when I'm only supposed to have 3, 500 quail and 200 rabbits. Yeah.
Is every tree row a good tree row, or are some of them better than others when it comes to pollination and to these habitats?
Okay, how many of you raise cattle? On a hot, hot day, where are the cattle? So there's a purpose for every tree row. So even if that tree row has no blooming plants, you know, if it's a walnut tree that doesn't require bees, if it's a hedgerow tree that doesn't require bees, if it's a, you know, paradise, you know, tree, which are horrible trees, but, you know, if it can provide a service for you, it's a good tree row. Does that make sense? If you want to incorporate honeybees, there are better trees to choose to interseed into your, you know, into your dying tree row. So does that kind of make sense? So having a windbreak and having shade is super important. And I'm trying to get Jim Johnson to give his talk on worms, but he will tell you that the worms that are in your fields are coming from your tree rows. That's where they live. At least that's what I got from his talk 4 years ago. Yes?
On your rabbits, do you feed them other supplements like hay that you would buy or other pellets, or do you feed them all with your own stuff that you've grown?
I do have to barter for hays. Alfalfa, Bermuda, Timothy, oat hay. So I basically trade meat for those things, or I sell meat and eggs so that I can buy those things. But actually my rabbit operation is fully funded by all the rabbit poop that I sell between Valentine's Day and Mother's Day. I sell a bag of rabbit poop for $6, and I make about $5,000 to pay for all the feed for about 500 rabbits for the year. So 25 to 35 pounds. Yes. All the gardeners. All the rabbit poop that's going into my pots. I have videos on my TikTok on like how I plant my pots, and it goes rabbit poop, topsoil, plants, rabbit poop. Now my rabbit poop is special because I don't feed my rabbits pellet. Pellets have synthetic chemicals that are good for rabbits. Maybe not good for rabbits, but the rabbits will tolerate that the plants won't. So I had to learn that the first 2 years. So my rabbit poop sells for maybe more than others because I'm only feeding hays, alfalfa, sunflower seeds. So alfalfa, Timothy, oat hay, all those things, when the droppings fall into the rabbit poop, those become food for all my plants. So it's not just the rabbit poop; it's all these things that are, you know, that are falling from the rabbit feed. More questions? I think I have a couple more slides here, some extra credit slides. We're not going to talk about the beekeeping industry as a whole, but just for you to understand if you weren't in my other class, bees, there's about 2.6 million commercially kept beehives, and they get trucked around the whole U.S. every year to pollinate all these beautiful monocultures that farmers have created in all these specific regions that they're successful in. So we have set up, like the video said, these monocultures, giant monocultures of, you know, of orchards, of berries, of, you know, everything. And we have created the migratory beekeeper, which I will make go extinct one day, because farmers don't have time to also run a bee operation alongside their monoculture orchards, etc. So we have created this as farmers. They get trucked around like this all over the U.S., and most of those 2 million beehives travel at least through Kansas one time during that year. So we do capture some wild swarms. In other countries, there is a lack of pollinators because of all the pesticides, because of all the genetic messing around with all the trees. So this is a real problem in parts of like China, where, you know, they first decimated all these birds that were eating all these monocultures of crops. And with all the birds gone, then all the insects took over. So we had to figure out a way how to desiccate all the insects. But we killed everything off. The only thing, like there are companies that in the south of China, when the pear and the apple blooms start, they will have people go and clip every blossom. They will shake all the pollen off of these blooms from the south of China. They refrigerate the pollen and drive it, to the north of China so that in 3 or 4 days later, they can give it in little jars to all these humans to pollinate, to actually have all these fruits and flowers. I mean, this is a reality that they have caused for themselves. And I can tell you which videos to kind of watch to see all this. So the U.S. solution to this is, well, we'll just use drones. Well, somebody's got to gather all that pollen to be able to put it on a drone. Now, would you rather have a drone going around, helping your tassel because we're not having enough children to get them out to, to tassel all your corn for you? Or would you rather have a ton of bees out swarming your tasseling corn to produce more kernels on all your corn? I mean, what is more effective? Technology, if we can establish a foothold of bees, technology will never catch up. Yes?
What kind of things do farmers do that hurt the bee population?
Lack of continuous forage, lack of a diversity in blooming plants, lack of adequate water resources for bees. A beehive is an incubator. It requires high humidity, high heat. So they require a lot of water. Those are the kind of the top three. That's not even part of how we do it. The bees that we harness are feral bees that no beekeeper is going around and treating or feeding or anything like that. They have figured out which strains of bees are resistant or can live through neonicotinoid plants, GMO plants, pesticide applications. So the bees that we harness have already figured all that out on themselves. We've already killed all the ones that wouldn't do that. We've already created the super bee. What my company does is we put boxes out to see if we can get those super bees to come into our boxes. This is the death of the commercial beekeeper. We will put them out of business one day. This is how they feed their bees. This is called a pollen patty. It's made out of soy lecithin, egg yolk, yeast, high fructose corn syrup, and essential oils. This is what they're feeding their bees compared to what we're feeding our bees when we offer an array of flowering plants. This is sterile food. This is not alive. They'll eat this, but this is not the best food for them. This is the environments that these bees have to live in. The video said, we're not bad beekeepers. We're just trying to make a living. We don't know what's going on with our bees. Do you guys see any color in here? This is a desert. This could be, this is like no man's land. Who can live through that? They have to feed them something. These are like GI rations for bees.
How do you know the bees the honey that you're buying is legitimate honey?
None of the honey that you've purchased is probably legitimate honey. You can come to my booth and I'll sell you some. This is what happens when you go and talk to a beekeeper. You need to ask these questions. Do you feed sugar syrup? Here's bloom in a tank. This is what happens in every commercial beekeeping operation. Because look, there is no color back there. Nothing. There is not one bloom anywhere around. So commercial beekeepers have to feed them. Otherwise, these bees are going to die. They're feeding them sterile bee feed. This is just hilarious to me. Like, most people get into beekeeping to not consume sugar. And here we are feeding the bees sugar syrup that they're going to process and we're going to end up with. How do I know that? I used to do this. And guess what? It goes in. If the beekeepers were to put sugar or food coloring in the sugar syrup, and they would trace it from farm to table, as you would say, they would see it ends up in the honey. It ends up when you go to extract. Now, I get in trouble with this because people are like, can I buy some of that for St. Patrick's Day? I'm like, that's not the point of this. The point of this is garbage in, garbage out. You know? So every beekeeper does this. Every beekeeper. If you buy honey from a beekeeper, you need to ask them, do you feed sugar syrup? Do you feed pollen substitute? How can somebody in a city make, 5 gallons of honey when there's nothing in their backyard look like mine? It's impossible. And then the fumigation part of it. I'll get right to you. This is kind of the last thing. Our bees are never fumigated. Beekeepers cry bloody murder because farmers are spraying all these pesticides out in the open. In broad daylight, on less windy days, like all the conditions have to be right for you to spray. But then they go and suit up and vaporize oxalic and formic acid into the boxes. These are the questions you need to ask your beekeepers. Why are you dribbling oxalic acid, which is, one of the products of wood stripper, into a hive? Oh, well, it won't end up in the honey. How do you process it out of honey? Have you guys ever done a bug bomb in your basement or in your kitchen? The time I did one in my kitchen, I had to throw dishes away. I could not get the residue off. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it. So this is how bees are kept, and this is why you as farmers are going to be the stewards of beekeepers within the decade. The commercial beekeeper is done. They told you in the video. They're not going to make it. This is kind of the only downside, but we protect against stingers. But there was a question?
So I'm a second-year beekeeper, so I have lots to learn, and I'm intrigued. The sugar water, like in the spring, there's no honey super on there. So if you're, from what kind of we've learned,
yeah.
So is that still? It goes into their supply,
right?
Not the honey super.
So in this instance, I took 4 different hives because there was 4 different colors of food coloring. One hive got the blue, one got the red, one got the yellow, one got the orange. So it was internal, so there was absolutely no way it could be interchanged. Within 2 weeks, every single color was in every single hive. Hives are like employers. There is an incredible exchange in resources of food and bees and workload. So, in the middle of a spring flow, you might not have to feed your bees sugar syrup, but you fed them in the winter and they stored it, and they moved it.
That makes sense. They moved it.
Yeah.
And then the other one, I guess the same thing would be for, if you're treating the bees for mites or whatever.
Yeah.
And without the honey super, they still move. So.
Oh yeah.
So that makes sense.
Yep.
Okay.
And sometimes beekeepers will say, we'll only feed the weak hives during a honey flow, and there won't be any honey to harvest from them. But as you can see right here, all the colors exist. The stronger hives are going and stealing that sugar syrup from that weak one and bringing it back. So the only reason I went down this rabbit hole is I'm highly allergic to high fructose corn syrup. I break out in hives. So when I was feeding my bees sugar and I was having the honey, I was still breaking out and going, why is this happening? So I had to figure out how the honey moved.
So how do you feed them from the all season?
We don't. They have to feed themselves. We have to leave enough behind for them to have for the next year. And the bees know how to can their food. I can show you, I don't have a picture here, but they'll actually can their bee bread by topping off with honey. So they have a way to store long-term the food they really need. Other questions? If you have any more questions, I'll be at the booth. And, oh yes. Which honey was the honey from all over the world? The one you can get at Walmart anytime? It was A. So a honey that you can, that you look at and you can see like product of Brazil, Poland, Spain, USA and Argentina. You can look at the label, and that's usually a blend of honey. That honey will have a strong taste, but it won't have an astringent taste because 3 out of those 5 countries don't have access to like cheap sugar syrup. Cheap sugar. It'd be very hard to import it and expensive, so they don't feed it. Another couple of those countries, they can't import the chemicals because it's too expensive. So you'll have, some of the heavy laden chemical taste and sugar taste in like the U.S. only honey, the regional honey. Which one was that one? The second one. So that was probably the one that you guys probably liked the least, maybe. That some people like the most. We got to talk about your fried taste buds later. And then the last one is the honey that we produce, which most of the time, most people say that that's the most different one. Like they can't put a kind of a word to it. Yeah.
It didn't flow as easy.
Right. That could just be the varietal, but yeah. There's a question over here? No. Okay, thank you very much for sticking with me this whole time.